With recruitment, first and foremost, you've got like two different types of audience or customers, which is your clients and your candidates. So certain things, they cannot be straightforward. Sometimes it's ridiculously quick, like 24 hours if it's interim recruitment. And sometimes it can take weeks and months. So there's no like defined period either. There are so many nuances. With Salesforce, you could standardize like 80% of it. It is complex, but it's not impossible.
Welcome to Salesforce Radio, your destination for insights, news, and community connections within the dynamic Salesforce ecosystem.
I'm very excited to have Khyati Pal, Salesforce Radio today, the founder and managing director of YPP Consulting, but someone who I already met in a previous role and has a very storied, past with Salesforce and with the recruiting world. And we're very excited to dive into it today. So Khyati, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to discuss all things Salesforce and all things Titan.
So before we get into, I guess, your new role in the last year, coming up on a year right now, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Almost there. Almost there. I should be happy about it. But then, you start just thinking about, oh my God, everything I've achieved. What have I done in the last 12 months?
I know. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but as the years pass, they get shorter because your frame of reference is just, it's more familiar, and that's it. Every year is harder to achieve more and more. So we have to figure out how to increase our productivity in a shorter time span almost.
And everything is like broken down. Well, at least for me, it's like quarters, right? What did I achieve in Q1? What did I achieve in Q2? And it's like, oh my God, that's my life now. It's all in quarters about efficiency and productivity, like you said.
Exactly. Well, that's welcome to the life of a salesperson. I mean, for anyone no one's going to listen to it today. It's April 1st and everything reset today. Q2 started for me. So I'm like,
Literally.
all right,
Yeah.
start again. Here we go.
There we go. By the time everyone listens to it, they'll be halfway through Q2, maybe. I don't know.
So as our tradition has been on this podcast up until now, I'd like to keep with it. I'd love to hear about your past. I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got into the Salesforce ecosystem originally, what your background looked like a little bit, and then we can get into some of your actual experiences with Salesforce, with implementations, with recruiting, and eventually getting to your new role. So if you're up for that, would love to hear a little bit of your story.
How long have you got? A whole podcast about my backstory, my origin story. So I actually started my full-time career in sales, which was now how long ago? 18 years ago, in Sydney, and it was with a publishing company. And back in the day, it used to be print, very heavy on print, and digital-ish was just creeping in. And I used to do the equivalent of door-to-door sales, which is driving around, finding clients and selling them advertising in the newspaper, which was fun. But at that point, the very first CRM I ever used in that job, which was my first job, was Salesforce. And this is going back to the days of Salesforce Classic. And so I feel like my career kind of began with Salesforce and then we kind of parted ways. But that's what I was trained on. That was my first experience of a CRM. And I quite enjoyed it. So I think from the very beginning, I've always been in, some people say, oh, I'm not like a technological person or I don't like technology. I'm the opposite. So I didn't necessarily study specific, fields or degrees to do with technology, but it's just something that I've always been drawn to. So as my career progressed, so I went from sales to more like event management, still kind of selling, and then more in like your marketing roles, and then eventually more business operations like management. At every different sort of role that I had, technology played like a key point. And I think maybe because I saw what the potential was, whether it was just making like small efficiencies, moving from like Excel spreadsheets into, something better, building like a ticketing system rather than, doing it all manually. I, even at a very young age, ended up leading those projects, just because I was like, how can you not see that this is a better way to do things? And thankfully, I feel like in different roles with different companies, I was lucky enough to have, I guess, a good senior leadership team, or the person I was reporting to, my boss, who was like, "Let's do this. Yes, this makes sense." So because every time you do a project, you obviously win some, you lose some. You learn from it. So I feel like throughout my career so far, working in different departments, and also I'd say different countries. After Australia, I moved to London 8 years ago, continued marketing, and that was more in the advertising media agency world. And then decided to sort of switch industries and explored recruitment again as head of marketing and then director of marketing. Um, always with technology. So whether it was, simple things like growing a subscription business, building a subscription model, like what that looks like, even developing websites. Like at one point, I was designing 6 websites on WordPress. It was chaos. But understanding the different languages, the different jargon, for the lack of better word, but also the back end of how things were done. I would say I was lucky that I got the opportunity to experience that purely because I wanted to and I took the initiative. So it was a combination of things. And in recruitment, as sort of I explored more of what could be done, what could be changed, what could be done better within the recruitment agencies that I was working at, I obviously borrowed from my experience within the media agency, the advertising world, and looked at like the concepts or the refined concepts of like audience segmentation, audience understanding, the different models and the different methodologies that you build to sort of better customer understanding and better customer service. And as we did that, I just noticed that the CRM and the data piece was always a bottleneck. And it was purely because of how the industry operated, even now, like the nuance around ATS and CRM, what it is, and also the very transactional nature of recruitment, which is now changing, which is great. But I think even like going back 3 years, it was very much like just sell, just let's get the candidate in, and everything is, whatever, as long as I'm making money, printing money, and getting money in. And there's not as much I guess, importance put on the data piece or the long-term piece of what it could be if you had the right insights, what it could be if you were able to service your customer, right? What it could be if you were more proactive and consultative rather than transactional and reactive. So with that in mind, I ended up being part of 2 CRM implementations, one where I was part of the project and one which I led completely. And the latter ended up being a Salesforce CRM. And I think it was just like going back to my Salesforce days and just going, oh my God, it's changed so much. But also just having worked in marketing with so many different platforms and, whether it was email marketing or content platform or scheduling platforms, or like I said, different websites, platforms as well. It wasn't something that was like, oh my God, what is this? I don't know. I don't know how to deal with this. It was almost like, okay, this is how I can do everything now rather than having to do things differently in different platforms that don't talk to each other. So as I started working in designing that Salesforce CRM for the company where I was at that point, at that time, sorry, it was just it became quite apparent to me that the possibilities and how people don't understand what's possible on Salesforce itself. Like we had a great project manager, I remember, and we are like, oh, I want to do this and I want to be able to do this. And everyone was like, oh, that's just not going to be possible. And I'm like, no, let me just ask, like, let's define the use case and let's see whether or not it's possible. And I remember her saying, no, that's completely fine. And it's just one of those things where Salesforce has made so many things so simple, purely because a lot of the change happens at an org level. So your org is yours. Your org does not have an impact on anybody else's org. So therefore, you don't have to wait to put into a request with like product teams to go, oh, I think this feature would be great. Can you enable that across the board? And I think from a CRM perspective, that is incredibly powerful, especially for recruitment agencies that do a variety of recruitment types. So if you're just doing a straightforward perm recruitment, maybe not so much. But if you're looking at perm interim and you're looking at, uh, complex or more nuanced versions of recruitment where you may be dealing with public sector or regulated industries and you have to connect all the way from like BD or, outreach all the way to pay and bill, Salesforce allows you to do that. And I think that is incredible. So with that passion and view and discovery, I realized this is something that I can help other clients with. So then I set up my own business, like you said, almost 12, coming up to 12 months ago. And it's been fun ever since.
I love it. I mean, that is I love that you're able to get through that journey, in a short amount of time and give so much. It's an amazing talent, and to dig in a little bit, starting out in sales, kinda moving to marketing, and now on CRM consulting, specifically you're focused on the recruiting industry, or are you open to other
So
things?
I do work with recruitment agencies, but I also work with professional services. And in the last 2 years, I've worked with like retail, online retail clients, as well as like SaaS products. So it's a variety. But I think the focus for me at the moment is recruitment, but it would be those three industries: so recruitment, professional services, and anyone who's like in the SaaS world.
So tell me about recruitment and tell me about what you found in the recruitment industry that was different and that actually allowed you to really start like actualizing your potential within the industry and then eventually now going into kind of a more CRM focused role.
So you know how I said like the nuances. So for me, it's fascinating because I worked with a 900 people company last year and designed their lead to cash on Salesforce. And that was simpler than designing a recruitment CRM for like a 50-person company or even like a 60-person company. Now, why is that? Purely because there are so many nuances to recruitment. It is not straightforward. It is not like, okay, I have a product to sell. I market it, the lead comes in, I qualify the lead, it becomes an opportunity, I have a probability there, and then it becomes whatever, a sale, and then I hand it over to customer service. It's very, very linear, the first part of it. And then, of course, when you have the customer growth bit, that's where it can sort of get nuanced. But the initial part can be quite straightforward and the system kind of like makes sense, as in almost like the system works with the journey. So it's almost like you log things in so you can track that journey in a linear manner. With recruitment, first and foremost, you've got like two different types of audience or customers per se, which is your clients and your candidates. But then if you had to also broaden that, you've also got your own employees. So you've got your you know, recruitment. So B2E, B2C, B2B. You've got these three different like segments or customer types that you need to design around. And they don't all move in a linear way. So certain things, they cannot be straightforward. You can't just call somebody and go, hey, I've got a product to sell. Do you want to buy it? That's not how it works. You actually don't have a product. You might say you have a product. It's almost like, and also they might not have a need for it. So it's almost like, okay, I'm just chatting now. And I'm like trying to explore this relationship to see what kind of requirements you may have, like, because it's not one requirement. And the thing is, at that point, for a recruitment consultant, it might not make sense to log that activity into the system because it's so, vague, up in the air. It might just take so many more efforts before it can become a qualified opportunity or even a lead. And I think these nuances exist throughout the relationship and the journey, whether it's the requirements for the candidates or whether it's the type of workplace that the candidates look for. You're selling to two different parties. Sometimes it's ridiculously quick. So it happens like in a span of, 24 hours if it's interim recruitment. And sometimes it can take weeks and months. So there's no like defined period either. There are so many nuances. And then as we move forward, then the nuances around like onboarding, compliance, what kind of information that you require on the candidate, but also from the client vary. So once again, if you're in interim, depending on the industry that you provide for, so whether it's a regulated industry such as could be like rail or construction, or it could be a public sector organization or the NHS. All of them don't have a set standard or a criteria of what their candidates need to meet. Everything is varied. So in NHS, you've got clinical, non-clinical, completely disconnected. You've got all of these requirements and regulations and licenses that you need, whether you work in like construction and where you work there or rail. So these are just a couple of examples where the nuances exist, which make it really difficult to build like a simple journey or a standard journey. around the recruitment world. And I feel like with Salesforce, but also just by challenging existing status quo, I would say, because like I said, nuances exist, but there is no reason why you could not standardize like part of it. Even if you could standardize like 80% of it, it is complex, but it's not impossible. But it just requires more thought and maybe like a perspective that doesn't just take it as it's given, that is that it's too complex, sorry, we can't do about it. And I think that's what I thought I still think and I believe that I bring to the table. So it's like, no, it's a challenge accepted. Maybe I will fail, but let me at least try to see if it can be resolved. And I think that's why recruitment became almost like a challenge. Like it's like this is an industry which is nuanced, but it's not unique. This is an industry which actually could do with more system led growth purely because they would benefit as an industry from it, because of the customers that they serve. But also, recruitment as an industry has so much technology that's just thrown its way from like, which is like only part of the journey. So, designed for only part of the journey. There's like softwares that are designed just for outreach, just for interview, just for, and even within that, there's like layers and layers of like different features. So it is quite complex in terms of like buying as well. So just helping the industry a challenge itself that if it is hard does not mean it's impossible, but also how do you go about like designing and implementing tech where we can avoid like future complexity rather than just buy it and bolt it on to whatever crumbling tech stack we have. So that is my approach. And I think that's why for me, like recruitment just is fun. It's a challenge. It's fun.
As someone who has, my experience with recruiting is very much, from the outside, and most of the time as from, either recruiters just reaching out on LinkedIn with automated messages, which is, one part of that very big funnel that we're talking about, or, in helping them deal with certain challenges that they face in Salesforce. What I'm thinking about as you're telling me this is I'm thinking about someone, going on LinkedIn, say I'm looking for a bold, courageous, dynamic, XYZ. And it's like going from that place to actually, okay, this is the candidate I want. This is the pool of people that it could apply to. This is the place, systemizing that and putting it into, an actual system.
Yeah.
Now that helps me understand some of the challenges that people have had that I've spoken to about the recruiting sector, and something that I kind of missed before because yeah, you don't have a product, but you kind of need a person to represent what is supposed to be, matched to the needs of your client.
Yeah.
And what I'm wondering as you're telling me this and bring it kind of back to Salesforce, what has Salesforce done to support the recruiting industry? Now, I know there's plenty of, partners out there, and different tools that you can use
Yeah.
from third parties, but like, what does Salesforce have that really like is a home run for recruiting, for the recruitment industry? And I guess what is your pitch to an organization that's thinking of implementing some sort of 360 view, something, maybe not Salesforce, but a CRM, let's
Yeah.
call it, or you know, a a a a system that's gonna be the backbone of what they're doing.
Yeah. So, I'm big on less is more in terms of like the amount of like systems you have to plug in or not plug in might be different, like login. So I think from a user's perspective first, because you could design the best system in the world, but if it doesn't get used either by your customer or by your teams, it does not end up generating or resulting in whatever you hoped it was going to do. So it's almost like if you think about it from a user's perspective and why they would use it, it has to make sense. It has to tie in either with the day in, day out, or it has to result in making their lives easier. So when I think about all of these different tech platforms that get introduced in recruitment agencies, where a consultant now has to log into nine. I remember someone actually told me, to begin their day, they log into nine different platforms, and apparently that's quite subdued. And I was like, that is no wonder the adoption's poor, because you're asking, inevitably with 9 different platforms for a lot of data to be duplicated and re-entered multiple times, no matter how easy it is to, create records on those different systems. And of course, the balls are going to drop here and there by everybody. And all of a sudden, all the things that you hoped and wanted and wished for will just not happen. So, Salesforce, for me, the big pitch is that you are able to consolidate your operations within that one system, that it goes beyond the CRM piece. So, it's like you've got the CRM, which is your customer relationship management, journey. Fine, great. So, you can do the whole lead to cash. But with recruitment, you've got different partners who've built their CRMs, and they have integrated the ATS, which is obviously really important to the recruitment journey for the candidate and client, I guess, to manage that within that CRM. And it's this hybrid version of Salesforce for recruitment that works exceptionally well, because you kind of get well, best of both worlds, in my opinion, because you've got the front end covered. You're able to create records for candidates, clients. You're able to separate them depending on, types of accounts or organizations that might exist in you. You can separate them by industry. You can create ATS journeys, a separate ATS journey for your permanent recruitment versus a separate ATS journey for your interim recruitment, because one ATS is not fit for purpose, because they're different. Or you can have like another ATS journey for like search, for example. So Salesforce allows you to do that. And with these hybrid platforms that you've got the job objects in there, you've got, your dynamic lists, you've got other things which help you really create, I guess, your preferred lists from a search perspective, like types of candidates, who's available, who's not available. All those insights are quite easily available. Your own dashboards as a consultant, that again is like so easily available and configurable within Salesforce. But I think the most important thing for me is that in addition to the sales side of things and the ATS side of things, Salesforce allows you to cover the front bit and the back bit and the middle bit as well. So you've got the whole pre-sales, even marketing. Like marketing would be consistent, but let's just assume that the very, very passive outreach that happens right in the beginning, Salesforce is able to, you can do that within Salesforce, and you can connect the dots. And then as it moves forward, you can see which touch points, could have resulted in what kind of behavior. And then as you move forward, again, it's like looking at different compliance documents, requirements, ability to send documents for signature, ability to build portals, such as with Titan, to allow the candidates to upload information rather than submitting all of this confidential and sensitive information via email or WhatsApp. You've got very clear, secure ways of collecting that. And then finally, the processing of timesheets, the processing of payments, the generation of invoices. This whole 360 piece can be enabled via that one Salesforce org. So yes, you've got your core CRM, ATS, platform, but then you've got partners such as yourselves, or a variety of other partners that sort of plug into your Salesforce org and allow you to do everything from marketing to outreach to paying to compliance, everything that you may need to do, and also connect, with your website. So you've got everything that you need to do to, I guess, for you to enable you to work with your nuances that you are subjected to. It allows you to do that, and that's internationally. So if you're operating in different markets, it allows you to, configure for different markets as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds, I always remember I spoke to a Salesforce admin at a company in the US a number of years ago, and I said, what's your day-to-day like? She said, I'm a Salesforce admin and I manage, 25 Salesforce integrations, something crazy like that. And she was like, it's insane. And meanwhile, she was talking to me as a potential, additional Salesforce integration. Granted, I was pretty confident that we could replace a couple, but still, it's madness, right? Sounds like to me in recruiting, and you can have Salesforce in the middle, but you're still gonna have a lot of spokes, and there's still gonna be a lot of different places, and that's probably not something you're gonna be able to run away from, because
Yeah.
so many moving pieces, but at least Salesforce could be at the middle, and at least, the users, the people who work for the company can log in to one place, see all the information rather than having, the 9 different places they need to log in the morning, which is obviously completely,
Yeah.
yeah, just how, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. That's just not going to stick. Like, let's just not even
Yeah.
hope that that happens. That's just really wishful thinking. It's funny because you mentioned the different books. I feel like the danger there, as much as I love Salesforce, and I do, think that it's a great platform for recruitment, a certain size of recruitment. I don't think it's. I feel like that investment that Salesforce requires is probably not necessarily applicable to certain recruitment agencies below a certain threshold and below a certain type of recruitment, not below, and maybe like a different type of recruitment. But those different spokes, it's very easy to get carried away and create a very complex organization. So I think this freedom that you get with Salesforce to, create your own automations, create your own page layouts, create your own fields, custom objects, whatnot. The world is truly your oyster. It also, therefore, poses a danger where you can create a ridiculously complex organization. And if you, as an organization, A, don't understand Salesforce, or don't have the skill set in house to maintain it, to run it, I think you can run into trouble very, very quickly. Because if you don't have the right documentation, if you don't know who set up which flow with what, variable and what, you will be spending a lot of time like digging, which is time wasted. And if you don't understand what's linked to what, like even though, Salesforce allows you to see it, it's still so much investigative work required for something that could just be simplified from the get-go with either the right documentation or their quarterly checkup and check-in and clean-in, which most people don't do because we're so focused on just build, 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 build. And it's like, no, no, kill, 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 kill equally.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, yeah, every year I say, well, now the year is, it's 2025. And there's always something that I think most consumers, and when I say consumers, I'm talking about B2B, organizations that use certain software. I mean, everyone should be familiar at this point with technical debt and like what it means to have true technical debt, whether it means that you have 9 different systems that are running or 25 integrations within one system. We all know what it looks like, and it happens to me sometimes, I'll be speaking with a prospect and all of a sudden, I get an email from someone else. This person is no longer here. And that guy goes, yeah, he was doing our Salesforce implementation for the last year. And we started looking at what the guy's doing and he has no idea and it's like, but people are making still the beginner mistakes. And, someone like yourself who's got like and understanding, okay, yeah, it's gonna be complex. We're in a complex industry, but what at least we're gonna do is make it simple for the user, right? And I feel like, and I've talked about this a lot on the podcast, sometimes the users get forgotten about, right?
Always.
And because what matters is the reporting and what matters is the automation, and then it's like, you want to now onboard a new salesperson, let's say, or a new support person, and you realize like I have no idea how to teach them this crazy system that we created. So
Yeah.
what do you do? Like how do you get into the shoes of what the user is going to look like for Salesforce could be another CRM, and how do you make sure to keep them in mind while you're going through the implementation process and, bringing in all these different parts of the puzzle?
Yeah. My big thing is I always, regardless of who signs, the contract with me, I'm like, I need to speak to your teams. I don't want to just speak to you. You have your own expectations, requirements, ideas of what you want out of the system and what you want people to do. But I need to speak to them to actually know what's happening. And always, this is like guaranteed. When I speak to them, there are at least, I would say, 40% of things where the users tell a completely different story to what the C-suite or what the managing team believes. And I think that is why it is so important to actually speak to the users and understand their pain points, their bottlenecks, but also what it actually shines a light on is lack of internal education. People think you implement a CRM and it's just like set and forget. And it's not just CRM, like CRM is like a considerable central tech. for you. You're personally from, I would say, an engine, but it's like no matter which piece of software that the people, your people are expected to use, it is not always set and forget. If it's evolving with your business, such as your CRM would, it is a constant evolution of that CRM and a constant training. By training, I don't mean like every day have a session, but it's almost like a refresher or just checking in, or managers holding, users accountable about, like, if it's not in the system, it doesn't exist. So it's like a cultural thing for sure. But for me, it all starts with the user, and that helps me really understand where the what the truth, what not truth, but like what the reality of the situation is. Is it like an education issue? Is it a system issue? Or is there a huge disconnect between what is deemed to be the process and what the actual process might be, where the real issues are, and will the system actually be able to solve those? Because sometimes you are bound by, say, like I said, the regulated industries, or you've got your other like public sector. Those are the expectations of the customer and or how they work, and we can only enhance or streamline things to a certain extent. We can't do their work for them. So it's like, what problem can I solve? What problem actually first exists? What problems exist? What problems can be solved? And what problems cannot necessarily be solved completely, like as we would in a world where we could have it all. But what's the next best solution? So it's only by speaking with users and writing user stories. And it doesn't have to be like complex essays of user stories. It's just like, what do they do? What are their pain points? How and why they use the system, and what do they expect to get out of it? And what would be the motivation for them to use the system? And it's like designing that, and then, collecting that information and then designing the system, which kind of checks those boxes for me, because user behavior is super, super important, but also creating a simple system, which is almost, self-explanatory. And I think like Salesforce allows you to do that as well. And I think that's one of the other things that I really like. It's simple, unless you make it complicated with yet. But you could strip it back, and you can make it so simple. It is self-explanatory. It is intuitive. It is where you could find whatever it is that you're looking for, rather than battling through like layers and layers of complexity. So yeah, that's how I go about it. I think for me, communication is such a huge, huge piece. Like, I don't want to assume, so I'm just gonna talk.
Touching on one of those points that you just mentioned, I'd love to hear a little bit about the actual implementations that you've done. Maybe just if you could give us one like huge success, something that you're still really proud of today, and a total failure and a disaster. If you have one, or even if it's, you know, something that was almost a disaster because maybe you missed it or someone else missed it.
Yeah. So without taking names, I think I'll start with the disaster first. And it wasn't quite like sort of a disaster purely because it didn't quite get to the implementation phase, because thankfully the disaster happened beforehand. And it was more around the lack of communication internally. So I think some organizations that I've worked with have been quite complex, either through the size or just the way they operate. And I think internal lack of communication or silos I have seen, and that's why I'm like a staunch opponent of silos, because it really just stops anyone from getting anything done. And it wasn't just me as a consultant who found it incredibly, incredibly hard to actually do something of value. So it's like, sure, I'm getting, paid, whatever, and I can do that. But it's just like, that's not what I want to do. I want to be able to create something and deliver something that actually helps and makes a difference. And I think for me, that was incredibly challenging, sort of to navigate internal complexities, but politics to an extent where it was, how would I say this politically correctly as well? In that, it's just like there are so many egos and layers and decisions that people make, which are in silos, that without like considering other departments. And then 6 months later, it all comes to, well, for the lack of a better word, or a phrase, shit hits the fan, and you're like, oh my God, blame games happen. And I think when you go into an organization like that, it is quite hard to find somebody who's willing to take accountability, but also ownership of like giving you the correct information. And I think also lack of executive sponsors internally. So I think anyone who's been a business analyst and who does any kind of analysis will understand the pain here that, you are brought in to do all of this work, but there's like no sponsorship. There is no group of people that can actually guide you or give you the information you need. And as try as you might, because like I said, I do love a challenge. So I tried, but I think even after doing what needed to be done, it did end up being a disaster purely because I did not move forward with it. It was just unpleasant and it was going to be a disaster. And the other thing that I'm really proud of, I think all the projects I have worked on so far, I'm quite proud of them purely because, and I know this is like a thing where I'm not taking names, but it's just like I've worked, I think Keystream will always be very special to me because that's where I think it really started, well, not started, but it really was the big milestone of like having done, a build around all the complexities of recruitment and then seeing it play out and seeing it make a difference internally and also seeing how good the adoption ended up being once we migrated from like the old CRM to now the Salesforce based CRM, and also like how the reporting and the analytics actually made sense and contributed towards like, business use case, but also business insights. And I think that I'm proud of purely because I led that project with all the users in mind and everybody had an opinion, sure, but I think it was my ability. I'll take pat my back to just translate that into the requirements that the business needed and the users needed. And then also evolve that Salesforce continuously. And now there's another person who takes care of, and he is now a Salesforce admin as well. So it's almost like the internal ownership. I was able to lead with that, and I think for me that's quite that's something that I'm quite proud of. And since then, there's been 4 different projects that I've worked on. 2 of them are still underway, so I'm hoping that they're a success as well. But so far, we're going through it.
It's very exciting. And, before we wrap up, would love to hear like what you're excited for this year in terms of Salesforce, in terms of, having your own business, your own firm. What are you looking forward to?
I think I personally am excited about the potential of how people can explore different opportunities. And I'm hoping to sort of educate people either through my work or through just things I share online through my newsletter or like even like LinkedIn, just like what's possible and how they should sort of approach operations. As someone who became quite technical without having a technical background, it was all through, education, and it was all through like upskilling, using a lot of information that's available. But I think Salesforce, like Trailhead, gives like so much information and your ability to like educate yourselves. So I'm hoping to sort of do that. And I think I'm quite excited about that because especially in the world of operations, I usually say the forgotten world, but yet the world that really has the impact on bottom line. It can do with a little bit of, you can make a difference. It's not just all about sales. It is actually the difference that operations can make. And as the technology that is being talked about, whether it's agents or, other kinds of, whether it's like other kinds of predictive or Gen AI models that are coming our way, I think ops is where it's going to have a huge impact in terms of streamlining, but also like assisting the work. And I'm quite excited about that because as much as that is viewed as the boring bits, that is the most exciting bits for me. And as far as my business is concerned, just growth. It's like you said, it's coming up to 12 months. Hopefully the next 12 months are going to be even better.
Wonderful, Khyati. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Really been a great conversation. A pleasure to have you on Salesforce Radio, and looking forward to seeing you again sometime soon.
Thank you. See you soon. Thanks, then.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Salesforce Radio. Don't forget to subscribe for more exciting discussions, expert tips, and exclusive interviews with industry leaders. Stay connected with Titan, plus the power of the planet's leading CRM. See you next time.